Good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday, and welcome to our special training on the buyer broker agreement and the different compensation agreements that are now being used in our industry. My name is Robert, and I want to thank you again for joining us. We are recording our session. I will share our video inside of our YouTube channel. I've already gone ahead and placed the link of our YouTube channel inside the chat. So please go ahead and click on that channel and watch all of our past recordings. I'm also going to share a PDF file with you right now through the chat. If you guys can download this file, this is some of the special instructions that we have when working with a buyer broker agreement, and also the different types of compensation agreements that we will be going over today. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. And of course, guys, if you have any questions, this is an interactive question or training. I encourage you to ask questions. And also, I want to mention that next Friday, the 30th of August, we are going to have a special live training at our Coral Gables office, which will cover exactly these forms, what we're going to be talking about today. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of people asking questions on what forms to use. Maybe you belong to different real estate chats and you're just viewing what people are talking about. So we hope that this training today will clarify a few things for you. All right, so give me 1 minute. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll begin the class. All right, so inside of your chat, I did share this PDF file that we prepared for you. This is some of the Q&A, the questions and answers that we got from the training from the Miami Association of Realtors. We've taken several trainings. Teo and myself, we've taken several trainings. I'm sure some of you have already taken some trainings as well. It's great to be prepared, right? You need to learn what this industry is going through and how we move forward how we move forward. So we are going to discuss today the compensation agreements and also the buyer broker agreements. Of course, you guys all know as of August 17th, it is now required to have a buyer broker agreement signed by your buyer, even to show one property. All right, so even before you begin showing a property, you must have a buyer broker agreement signed. Buyer, we will discuss how to present that buyer broker agreement and how to approach your buyer with this agreement. All right, so submit all buyer broker agreements to our transaction coordinator. Those of you that don't know our transaction coordinator email address, it's eliteofficetc@gmail.com. Again, that's eliteofficetc@gmail.com. We want to save all buyer broker agreements on file. So you want to save a copy for yourself and then, of course, send it over to our TC. A buyer broker agreement is not required for commercial or rental transactions. All right. So I want to repeat, this is only for residential purchases. And if you are working a commercial or a rental transaction, a BBA or buyer broker agreement is not required. All right. Now, there are some compensation agreements that you guys want to learn how to use, especially the one for rentals. So you know that now when we search the MLS, compensations are not displayed on the MLS listing. So of course, the next step for us is to call that listing agent and ask if any compensation is being offered by the seller to the buyer broker. If compensation is being offered, then in a rental purpose, right? So in a rental, let's say they're offering half month or they're offering 5% or whatever it is that they're offering, you want to get a compensation agreement signed. And this is a new agreement now loaded into Form Simplicity. And it's the compensation agreement for rentals. All right. And it's called compensation agreement, owner, listing broker to tenant broker. We will discuss that agreement in today's course. Okay, that's going to secure that you do get compensated for representing a tenant. Also, you want to get a compensation agreement for any purchase, right? So once again, if you're representing a buyer, you already have that buyer broker agreement signed, and your buyer has agreed to compensate you whatever percentage you put on that agreement. However, when you are representing a buyer and you're about to show a property, you should ask the listing agent what type of compensation, if any, is being offered by the seller. And then you want to present together with your purchase offer, right? Your offer to purchase the property. You want to present one of two or both compensation agreements. There's the compensation agreement seller to buyer broker. So that would be the individual owner of the property is compensating the buyer broker, whatever percentage. And then there's the compensation agreement, which is the seller broker to buyer broker. All right. So you have two compensation agreements. We recommend that you use both and then have the seller agree to one of them. Okay. We'll discuss that in today's course as well. As listing agents here at Elite Ocean View Realty, we prefer that you use the seller to buyer broker compensation agreement, right? We want to have the seller, so our seller, so as listing agents, we want to have our seller compensate the buyer broker directly at closing. So when the title agency is preparing the closing documents, there is a certain percentage that will come out of the seller's proceeds that will compensate the buyer broker. So that's the compensation agreement as listing agents for Elite. We prefer that you use, and that's the seller to buyer broker, the one that I have here at number 1. Okay. All right. So add a compensation disclosure to all listing agreements created prior to the latest revision done in July of 2024 and sent to your sellers. What does this mean? You'll see it in today's class. All older versions of the exclusive right to list or the exclusive right to sale listing agreements did not contain a new disclosure that's already part of the new revisions. So all we need to do, guys, if we have listings that are 3 months old, 4 months old, prior to July of this year, then you want to get a compensation disclosure out to your sellers. They do not have to sign it. They just need to receive it and understand the new disclosure that is now part of all listing agreements. And we will show you what that disclosure is. Okay. Now, next up on this is the calling of the listing agent to ask for any compensation or concessions that are being offered. It is completely legal, right? You can call, they can send you a text message with the compensation, they can send you an email with the compensation, they can send you a flyer, they can direct you to their website. The only place that you cannot list a compensation is going to be on the MLS listing. So once again, listing agents do not disclose compensation amounts in your MLS listing whatsoever. Not in the remarks, not in the broker remarks, nowhere on the MLS listing. It is a violation. Any other form of communication is permitted. All right. So if you guys have questions, hey, as a listing agent, can I disclose the compensation over the phone? Absolutely. Right. Can I disclose the compensation that is being offered over a text message? Yes. And can I, disclose it in any other format other than the MLS? Yes, you can. All right. Now, as listing agents, when you are hosting an open house and a buyer freely walks in to see the property, right? As a walk-in, you do not need a buyer broker agreement to show the buyer the property, right? So you're hosting an open house on Saturday. You have several buyers from the neighborhood walk in. You do not need a buyer broker agreement to show the property. Now, if the buyer would like to make an offer on the property, a buyer broker agreement is required to represent them. All right, so that's the difference, guys. So you don't need to have everyone walking in the door sign a buyer broker agreement. You're not representing them yet. But once they want to make an offer and they do not have an agent, they're not working with an agent, then yes, you must go ahead and get a buyer broker agreement signed. Guys, if you have any questions, you can always email us. You can email Teo, and that's teo@eliteoceanviewrealty.com, and you can email myself, and that's robertr.miami@gmail.com. We would be glad to assist you with your questions. If you want to know more about the changes in today's industry, you can always go to miamirealtorslive.com, which is the video library for the Miami Association of Realtors and all of their past webinars and seminars and trainings on this topic and more are located inside of MiamiRealtorsLive.com. All right. And then the last one here. All right. This is obviously a very touchy subject, but if you suspect that another agent is working with a buyer without that buyer broker agreement, only if you're positively sure and it does affect your business, then go ahead and send an email to MLS@MiamiRE.com and let them know, hey, look, I was working with this buyer. I had a buyer broker agreement. They went ahead and switched to another agent, and that agent is not using that buyer broker agreement. Then go ahead and send an email to MLS@MiamiRE.com. All right. Can you disclose the compensation on social media? This is a question on the chat. Absolutely. Any other form of communicating that compensation is permitted. The only place you cannot place the compensation is inside the MLS. All right. So that is part of course, the settlement for the NAR lawsuit. And as you may know already, compensations were removed from the MLS. All right, so let's go ahead and share my my other screen here. And guys, that PDF file that I just went over, I did upload it to the chat. So just go to the chat, download this so you know the steps and the rules. All right. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my browser here, and we want to make sure that you guys know where all of these documents are located and how we are going to use them going forward. All right. So here we are. We are looking at the YouTube channel that I did share with you inside of the chat. Guys, I will load this video right into the YouTube channel. So for example, last Tuesday's class, MLS tips and tricks is in there. And then we have the home appraisal process, the home inspection process, working with buyers, working with renters, so many other different videos here, guys. It's all there. It's all for your benefit. All right. So that is our YouTube channel. All right, so I'm going to jump right into form simplicity. All right, so of course, you guys all know form simplicity is where we have all of our forms, right? And you can access form simplicity from inside of your Miami Gateway, and it's right here. Okay. So we are now inside of form simplicity. I've already created 2 transactions that I'm going to use in today's example. I created a purchase transaction, and I also created a rental transaction. All right. So actually, it's not a purchase. I did a residential listing, but I uploaded some documents in here for you guys to see. So let's begin with rentals. All right, let's begin with rentals. So if you're looking at a rental property, right? So I'm going to go to the MLS here and let's take a look. You're looking at a rental property. Of course, now the compensation is no longer listed on the MLS, right? So what would be your next step is, of course, you need to contact the listing agent. Once you contact a listing agent, there's their phone number. You want to say, hey, I've got a client. They want to see your property. And by the way, how much compensation is being offered by the landlord, if any? All right. So notice the remarks. There's no signage here of compensation and on the broker remarks either. All right. So let's keep it that way. Let's keep it clean. Now, all the way at the bottom, you are going to see somewhere here a new field where it says seller to buyer incentives. So it's right here. All right. In this case, it's a rental, so there's no answer. All right. This is a new field that alerts us as buyer agents, right? Right now we're looking at a rental, but this is a new field that alerts us as buyer agents if incentives are being offered by the seller. Seller to buyer incentives, yes or no. All right. What's a seller to buyer incentive? It's a concession. This is not a compensation. It's a concession. So if the seller's offering set amount as a concession to the buyer's closing costs, then of course they should answer yes here. So we are aware that the seller is offering some type of concession to the buyer. All right. So this is not compensation. This is a concession or a contribution to the buyer's closing costs. All right. So yes, I'm still going to have to call the agent. If this is a purchase, I'm still going to have to call the agent and I'm still going to have to ask, hey, is the seller offering compensation, which is different from concessions? Compensation is that they are going to compensate the buyer broker for our job, for what we do for bringing them a buyer. All right, that's different than a concession. All right, so here we have this listing, right? And what happens is that you're going to create a transaction by clicking on Form Simplicity. Once you create that transaction, let me go ahead and jump right into this transaction that I see here. All right, there's a contract to lease. That's obviously the offer form that we're going to fill out. And then there is the compensation agreement, owner, listing broker to tenants broker. Where can you find this compensation agreement? Inside of the forms packages. So open the forms packages, click on lease, and you have the compensation agreement, owner, listing broker to tenant broker. All right, so the listing agent said yes, the landlord is compensating half a month. Then you want to make sure that with your CTL, with your contract to lease, you also submit a compensation agreement, owner, listing broker to tenant broker. All right, so let's go ahead and preview this form. I'm going to open this form right here, and let's go ahead and preview it. All right, so here we have the owners of the property, right? We have the owners of the property. Of course, you're gonna pre-fill this information in your CTL, right? So that's the owners of the property and then the listing broker. Okay, and then you have here the tenant broker, which would be our office. There's the property address, right? And then property listed by, and then the listing broker. Here you have term. So this compensation agreement takes effect when a fully executed copy has been delivered to all parties to this agreement and will remain in effect for how many days? If you leave it blank, 30. So if it's blank, it's 30, then you might as well just put in 30 days. All right. So this compensation agreement is good for 30 days. You should rent the property. You should have that move-in take place within 30 days, right? So that's why it defaults to 30 days. Okay. In no event shall the term extend past the termination date of the listing broker's current listing of the property. So this compensation agreement is not going to go beyond the expiration date of the listing. Okay. Broker compensation. This is very simple, guys. How much are we going to make? Right. So owner listing broker agrees to compensate tenant broker. Check one of the of the below. So if you check this one here, all right, and let's say the rent is $4,000 a month and it's half a month, then you can already put in here either the amount of $2,000 because it's half of the first month, right? Or a percentage of the first month, or you can put a percentage of 12 months. So if they tell you it's 5%, I know we already pre-filled here 5%. So if they tell you 5%, then you're going to go ahead and put in here, check, right? 5% plus any fees, all right? And that's of the gross lease value, 5% of the gross lease value. If you're going to do the half month, then just go ahead and check here and put in, let's say it's $4,000 a month, and it's half a month, so it's $2,000, and that's it. All right. You don't have to put in a percentage of the first month's rent or the percentage of 12 months rent. You don't have to do that if they tell you it's half. So put in that there. If there's any other terms, brokers' commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. Let's go ahead and talk about what this means. Remember, we talked about that there is a compensation disclosure that needs to be added to all listing agreements that are created prior to July of 24. This is the actual disclosure that is being added. All right, so all new listing agreements, this is revised August of 2024. The exclusive right to sell listing agreement also has the revised agreement with this disclosure. Brokers' commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. All right, so all new agreements already contain this disclosure. So if you are getting a new listing, you do not have to obtain, not obtain, but you do not have to distribute a compensation disclosure to your seller slash landlord. Okay. All right, so basically the rest is very simple. Just read through it and then have the owner listing broker sign and date it. And then, of course, you are the authorized associate, you will sign and date it. All right, so they agreed to this form that they're going to pay you $2,000 for procuring the tenant, and it's going to be signed by both. Any questions on the compensation agreement that is to be used for rentals? Compensation agreement, owner, listing broker to tenant broker. Any questions? All right. So it's quiet. That means that you guys do not have any questions. So we're going to go ahead and move forward. All right. I'm going to go ahead and close without saving. Let's click on transactions. I'm going to go now and show you a purchase transaction. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the purchase transaction I want to show you. Actually, let me click on another one. I'm going to click on home. And this is the one I want to show you. All right, so I prepared this so we can show it to you guys. All right, there is the exclusive buyer broker agreement transaction broker. This is the form that is required to work with any buyer. Of course, there is the exclusive right of sale listing agreement transaction broker. That's the listing agreement when you're getting ready to list a property for sale. And then there is the as-is residential contract for sale and purchase. This is the purchase contract. All right. Here we have the compensation disclosure statement. I'm going to open it real quickly to show it to you. And then we have the compensation agreement seller to buyer broker. And we have the compensation agreement seller's broker to buyer's broker. And then we have some modification of the compensation agreement. And we have modification to compensation agreement seller to buyer broker. All right, so these are some of the new forms that have been added to Form Simplicity. It is important for us to understand each form. Beginning with the compensation disclosure statement. Again, I repeat, if your listing was created prior to July of 2024, then you must open one of these forms, put in our brokerage name, okay, and put in here advisors, buyers, sellers, or owners, put their name here, and then put the date of the agreement, right, of that listing agreement, put the date of that listing agreement, and you're just going to send it to your seller slash landlord. It basically says, notice to buyer, seller, owner, brokerage compensation is not set by law and is fully negotiable. So this is a disclosure that was missing from the older forms, right? How we used to do business. Now in the new way, or the new way we go forward, this disclosure is part of every single listing agreement, every single purchase contract, and every single contract to lease. All right, so brokerage compensation is not set by law and is fully negotiable. All right, understand the compensation disclosure statement. No signatures are required. You just simply need to go ahead and forward it to your seller slash landlord. Any questions on this one? The compensation disclosure statement? No? All right, we're going to go ahead and close it out. And I do want to open now the listing agreement. All right, so I'm going to open up the exclusive right of sale listing agreement, and let's show you parts of the listing agreement that is now different and where you can find that important disclosure we just talked about. All right, so here's the typical listing agreement for a single family home that you're going to sell, or a condo. It could be either one, right? Residential. And here is where you're going to put in the dates of your listing agreement, the property address, legal description, and then whether the property is occupied or not, and then the price of the property that you're listing the property for, and the terms that you're accepting. All right. So let's drop down here and let's go to number 6. All right, let's go to number 6. And number 6 is broker authority. All right, just make sure that you understand what all of this means here. You're going to get the initials here of the sellers, right? You're going to get the initials of the sellers. Move on to seller obligations. Once again, understand what the seller obligations are. And then let's go to number 8, the all-important number 8. All right, so number 8, if you use our listing agreement that's inside of our package, we have pre-filled here a 4%. And you may ask, why is it 4%? Remember that we always try to ask for maybe 6% from the seller or 5% from the seller. And why are we asking lower? All right, because compensation, seller will compensate. This is number 8. Understand this, right? It's 2 different forms, the way it used to be, the way it is now. Seller will compensate broker as specified below if a buyer's procured who is ready, willing, and able to purchase the property or any interest in the property. Who are they compensating? They're compensating us. So yes, we put in an aggressive 4% there. Okay? The seller needs to understand that that's the percentage they're going to pay us, only us, not the buyer broker. So if you want to bring that down to 3%, that's fine. You want to bring it down to 2.5%, it's really up to you how you're going to negotiate these compensations. Remember, compensations are fully negotiable. All right. So that's why we put in a 4% there as a starting point. If they agree to compensating you 4%, you're going to make 4% on this transaction. All right. Any questions on number 8? Take a look at letter F in number 8. Brokerage commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. So if you're using this listing agreement, which is revised as of August of 2024, actually as of July of 2024, then you do not need to submit a compensation disclosure statement because this disclosure is already part of the agreement. All right, very important for us to understand that. Now we move on to number 10. Number 10 is compensation to buyer's broker. Now, of course, if you're representing the seller and you're at the listing presentation, it is important for us to explain to the seller the benefits of compensating the buyer broker. All right. If your seller says, hey, Robert, I don't agree with it, I'm not going to offer any compensation, then unfortunately right here, you're not going to fill anything out. But if they say, Robert, yes, we're going to go ahead and compensate the buyer broker 3%, notice there are 3 options here. And the one that we choose as an office is letter B. Letter B says, seller authorizes broker to offer compensation to buyer's broker from seller in the amount of whatever they agree to. All right, so we put here 3%, right? So that would be a total of what? 6% from the seller, right? 3 for the listing side and 3 for the buyer side. Letter A says seller authorizes broker to offer compensation to buyer's broker in the amount of. So the seller says, we authorize you to offer any compensation to the buyer's broker in the amount of, and you put the percentage here, then you use letter A. We prefer that the seller compensates the buyer broker from their seller proceeds at closing. So that's why we selected letter B. Seller authorizes broker to offer compensation to buyer's broker from the seller, not from the brokerage, See, this amount will be paid from broker to buyer's broker. All right. We prefer to use from seller to the buyer's broker. All right. So that basically takes away any kind of liability for Elite as the listing office having to compensate a buyer's broker. We just want to have it where it goes directly from the seller at the closing, the seller proceeds. That percentage comes from their proceeds and it goes to compensate the buyer broker, which is how it's always been, guys. All right. It's always been that way. So if you've closed on a property, you look at the closing statement, the Alta, you'll see that from the seller proceeds, the compensations are deducted for the listing brokerage and for the buyer broker. Any questions on number 10? Compensation to buyer broker. All right, guys, we need to learn how to read this. We need to learn how to explain this to our sellers during our listing presentation. All right.
Oh, que son few minutes.
Is there a question or no? All right. No questions here. All right. So, of course, everything else pretty much stays the same. In the additional terms, we have added our transaction fee to the listing agreement. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and close out the listing agreement, guys. I just wanted to touch on some of the important changes and updates to the listing agreement in the event that you have not studied that agreement yet. Okay, now I want to go ahead and move into the buyer broker agreement. We've had classes on this before, and we will continue to have classes on this. And the reason why is because, of course, now when you represent a buyer, even before you even go see one property, you must obtain a signed buyer broker agreement. All right, so just like a listing agent needs to obtain a listing agreement from the seller, now buyers need to also sign an agreement to work with the buyer, right? So here's the buyer broker agreement. Here's how we're going to prepare it. So right here, we're going to put in the consumer's name, so your client's name. Here, we're going to put in Elite Ocean View Realty and then also your name. All right, and that'll go right here in the line that is designated for broker. The term of this agreement, so let's say you're going to begin shopping for a home today, and today is August 22nd. You're going to put in today's date, right? You're going to open here, and you're going to put in August 22nd. Let's say you anticipate that you're going to take 4 months to find the property and purchase a property, then you want to come here, and if you agree to 4 months, then you want to go here, and you want to go and set the expiration date to 4 months from now. Type of property, if they're looking for a residential property, whether it be a single family home, condo, townhome, anything residential, then you want to put in residential. When it comes to location, don't limit yourself to just one city or even one county. All right, so if they're open to either Miami-Dade or Broward County, then you're going to go ahead and put in here Miami-Dade and Broward County. If you put in, let's say, Coral Gables, and you happen to find them on property in Key Biscayne, then you're not protected by this buyer broker agreement. All right, so just go ahead and be broad and say Miami-Dade and Broward County. All right, so here it's going to explain what the broker's obligations are. So what our responsibilities are. This is where you add value to your job, right? So building that value proposition is important. Make sure that we understand what our job is as a buyer agent, and we know how to explain it to our buyers. Then right here, the consumer's obligations. So the buyer's obligations are this: they must cooperate with the broker, and they must, find time to make the property available for showings, and they must not talk to other agents, things of that nature. They're going to have to go through this and agree to all of this, right? So initials here and initials down here for the listing, for the buyer broker. And then we arrive at the section for a retainer, guys. We put in here in our package a retainer of $1,000. If you're going to charge a retainer, then what is your retainer fee? The retainer is non-refundable. So it's up to you. You can zero this out and not charge a retainer fee. Like that, they don't have to give any money up front. So it's really up to you whether you're going to charge a retainer or not. And it is non-refundable. All right, gonna pause real quick here. There's a question on the chat. Is this form in Spanish? Unfortunately, it's not. That's one question that was asked several times inside of the training for the Miami Association of Realtors. This form is not in Spanish and will not be in Spanish. All right, so you're gonna have to translate to your Spanish-speaking clients what each section means, unfortunately. Okay. All right, so compensation, that's number 7, compensations broker. So here's where we're going to say how much we are going to make on by representing them. All right. So once again, guys, if you look at our form, all right, we were a little aggressive by asking for 4%. And here's the reason why we put 4%. Doesn't mean that you're going to make 4%. But if you get them to agree to 4%, and let's say the seller is compensating 3%. Now the buyer, all they owe you is 1%. And now you made 4% on this transaction. So you actually made more than what we used to make, which was, right around 2.5%, 3% by representing a buyer. So if you want to be aggressive, then go ahead and leave 4% here. And if the seller happens to offer 3%, then the buyer only owes you 1% at closing, and you made a total of 4%. Does that make sense to you guys? All right. That's the reason we have 4%. Now, of course, if your buyer looks at this and objects and says, Robert, that's just way too much. All right, well, then drop it to 3%. Remember, compensations are not set by law and are fully negotiable. So negotiate a compensation that's comfortable for both parties. So they are agreeing to pay you 3% plus $495, which is the broker transaction fee at closing. This represents a big deal now for buyers, right? I mean, typically they're used to not signing an agreement to work with a buyer agent, and they're not used to paying any type of percentages in compensation. So presenting this is going to present us a challenge, right? You have to make sure that the buyer knows that this form is required by law. It's a new law put into place. It's all over the news. It was all over the major networks. It's been all over the internet, right? This is a form now required by law. Even if they want to go to the next broker, right? Because they don't agree with your percentage or with you having to get this signed, that other broker is going to do the same thing. All right. So make sure that they know that this is required by law and that 3% is the compensation that you will receive at closing. Now, who pays for that compensation is up to now negotiating with the listing agent that represents the seller and trying to work out a compensation coming straight from the seller, right? So tell them, hey, look, we're putting 3% here because I need to secure my compensation by representing you. Now we're going to go shopping for homes, and statistics say that 91% of the sellers out there are going to continue to offer compensation. So when you do talk to the listing agent and you request a showing of the property, and then you also ask, hey, is your seller offering a compensation? And they tell you, yes, the seller's offering 3% to the buyer broker. Well, then now the buyer does not owe you anything at closing because the compensation is coming directly from the seller. If the seller tells you, or the listing agent tells you the seller's offering 2% to the buyer broker, then in this case, the buyer needs to compensate you 1% at closing. So you see how that works? All right. Now, guys, don't get any funny ideas. All right. When you are searching in the MLS, you have to show your buyers any property that they would like to see. All right. Whether they offer compensation or not, it is our duty to show our buyers every property. There is no filtering allowed in the MLS. They do not have a filter for compensation being offered. So it's not like you can build a search on the MLS and say, show me properties that offer compensation. All right. Notice on the MLS, the only thing they added was concessions, right? Or incentives, seller to buyer incentives. They did not add compensation. All right, so there's no filtering allowed. Okay. All right, so B is for lease. I repeat, you do not need a buyer broker agreement for a rental transaction. All you need is, to secure your compensation is that compensation agreement. Landlord, tenant agent, sorry, landlord, agent to tenant broker. Okay. So you don't need this for a lease. So yeah, you can erase this, right? Erase this, erase this. We put it here just in case you wanted to use it, but honestly, you don't need it. Okay. Additional fees, commission on purchase for pre-construction property and new developments to be 7% of the purchase price. All right. This is written by our office. So if you're going to represent your buyer who's looking at pre-construction properties and they settle on a property where the developer is paying 5%, then because of this term being on this agreement, the buyer is going to owe you another 2% at closing. All right. Again, fully negotiable. Change it if you need to change it. Okay. Let me check the questions here. Can we ask our buyer if they want to see properties that offer no compensation, and because of that, they need to pay it? Great question. Let's just stick to the law, and the law is that, or ethically, we must show our buyers every single property. Because you know what? There may be their dream property, the right property for them, and we fail to not show it to them because they don't offer compensation. So we must show every property to our buyer, and they have to fully understand that they signed this agreement, right? In order to see even one property, they need to sign this agreement. So it's not like we can show them property and then sign this agreement. No, they need to sign this agreement. We go shopping for properties. If they choose a property where a compensation cannot be negotiated by the seller, then unfortunately the buyer is going to have to compensate us whatever percentage we put here. So there's a follow-up question. Then at the moment that they select a property, we inform about the compensation under his payment. So if they choose a property where a compensation is not being offered and concessions is not being offered, here's the difference, guys. A compensation is coming from who? From the seller to the buyer broker. So the seller has agreed in the listing agreement, right, to compensate 3% to the buyer broker. And then a concession is the seller is offering a contribution of whatever amount to the buyer closing costs. So the seller, in essence, is helping the buyer lower their out-of-pocket costs to purchase the home. Okay, so if we find a property that the seller does not offer compensation and is not offering concessions to the buyer, then you're gonna have to negotiate maybe a lower purchase price, so you can fit in this 3% in your buyer's budget. So if the property is for sale at $500,000 and the market value is $500,000, you may have to end up offering $485, so you can offset the 3% that your buyer is now having to pay you at closing. All right. This is where your negotiation skills come in, guys. We need to learn how to negotiate. We need to learn how to be creative with pricing. All right. We added a protection period of 365 days. This protection period pretty much protects you, the buyer agent, from your buyer leaving you and going with another agent and purchasing a property that you showed them. However, this termination period pretty much expires the moment they sign a new buyer broker agreement with another agent. So, in my opinion, protection period is going to disappear because every buyer is required to sign a buyer broker agreement. So, this 365 or 30 days if left in blank, the moment the buyer cancels out of your agreement and goes with another agent and they sign a buyer broker agreement, then this termination period will cease, right? So it ceases upon consumer entering into a good faith exclusive buyer broker agreement with another broker. All right, so that's my opinion on the protection period. All right, it's pretty much not important. All right, guys, this is your buyer broker agreement. Yes.
Yeah, so am I understanding correctly that if the seller's broker offer us the percentage, so then the buyer doesn't have to pay his part, right?
Correct. Whether the
Okay.
seller broker is offering or the seller himself is offering. So let's say
Yeah.
the listing agreement. Remember how I had in the compensation for the listing agreement in section 8, I had
Yeah.
where A, the seller's broker compensates the buyer broker, or B, which is the seller compensates the buyer broker. So whichever way it occurs, if there is
Okay, so
compensation,
whatever is written in our agreement, for example, if we agreed for this like 3 or 4%, and if they are offering this 3 or 4%, so uh the buyer only paying the difference, right?
correct. So
Okay.
the difference is only paid by the buyer if what the compensation the seller's offering is lower.
Okay,
This is
got
how
it.
much you stand to make here. 3%, no matter what.
All right, thank you.
So yeah, so whether it comes from the seller or it comes from the buyer, you cannot make more than that. So this is why we put 4% here. In
Yes,
the
yes.
event that the seller offers 3 and then your buyer gives you 1, and now you made 4%.
Sounds
But
good.
that's aggressive, so put it to 3%, I guess. All
All
right.
right.
Robert, let me ask you something, please.
Yes.
Let's see that the worst scenario is that the seller is not gonna pay any compensation, and then the buyer wants a home. That's the same question that I placed before, but now it's another following. Then the buyer wants this home, and the buyer doesn't want to pay the compensation with this home as well. So what happened then?
We have to get creative. We have to offer lower. So if the property is at $500,000, we have to try and get the seller to agree to
Yeah,
480.
yeah,
So
yeah.
we lowered the cost. We lowered the cost of the purchase of the home, and knowing the property is actually worth $500,000, we have to get the seller to agree for a lower purchase price so we can get compensation.
Yeah, but I'm looking for the worst scenario. Let's see that
The
it
worst,
doesn't
the
happen
worst,
as
the
well.
worst,
So
the
what we
worst,
do with our customer?
the worst scenario, if you cannot negotiate anything with the seller
Okay. Uh-huh.
and your buyer refuses to pay, first and foremost, they cannot refuse to pay to work with you. See, you gotta present this form to a buyer the moment you start showing them properties.
Okay.
So they have already agreed that they're gonna pay you 3%, at closing for any property they purchase. So they can't go back. Let's go with the worst case scenario. They have a change of heart, they have a change of mind. Nothing. This cancels out and we don't have a deal.
Mm,
And
okay.
with rentals, sorry. And with rentals, if they are not, if they're not offering the percent like anything,
You
do
guys
we
have
have
to-
the same with the rent? No, right?
So you guys have to understand that the buyer broker agreement is only required for purchase. I want to
Mhm.
say probably 99% of the rentals are going to continue to offer you the half month compensation.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
Listen, it's like putting something for sale at an online store
Mhm.
and not offering any type of incentive or compensation to sell it. How long do you think it's going to stay on the market? For a
Right.
very
Yeah.
long time. So sellers know this, landlords know this. I think that they're going to continue to pay compensation. All right.
Okay.
We're all in this together. Every single agent in the entire US is in this together. Sellers, whether they try and save a dollar now, right, is one thing, but eventually they will figure out they're gonna have to continue to offer compensation to move their property to sell it faster or rent it faster. Okay. I don't know if you guys agree with me. I mean, that's how it's always been. That's how it's gonna always be. All right, guys, inside of the buyer broker agreement, number 14, brokerage commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. This is like the primary disclosure that is added to every agreement. All right, because the reason the lawsuit came about is because sellers were under the impression that the 6% compensation being collected to sell their property was set by law. And really, it was never set by law. It was always fully negotiable. And it just became the standard, right? It became the standard, but it was never set by law. All right, so you're going to see that disclosure pretty much on every agreement. Guys, this is your buyer broker agreement. Very important. I love the question that we had, the little interaction we had. It is important to know that in order to begin working with any buyer, you need to present this and you need to present the different scenarios, right? Because it's going to be scary for your buyer to say, I never had to pay 3%, to use your services. Why now? Well, first, this is the law. Second, while we are going to enter a 3% compensation here, we are going to try and seek compensation from the seller. So if we're successful at seeking compensation from the seller, then the buyer does not owe us anything. Whether compensation comes from the seller to the buyer broker, or compensation comes in a format of concessions, which is a contribution to the buyer's closing costs, right? In a closing, the buyer has to pay the closing costs out of pocket. So let's say the closing cost is $15,000, right? But the seller's offering concessions up to $12,000. So now the buyer has a credit in their closing of $12,000. Well, that $12,000 can be used to pay you on the deal. All right, so different ways to look at it. All right, closing this out, guys. I'm going to go ahead and close this out, and let me go ahead and show you the compensation agreement, seller to buyer broker. So we are getting ready to place an offer. We already spoke to the broker, and the broker says that the seller is offering 3% to any buyer broker who brings a buyer. All right, so we have that, whether it's in writing or verbal. It is important that together with your as-is contract for sale and purchase, you also present the compensation agreement, seller to buyer's broker. All right, so seller to buyer broker. Actually, I would present both and have them sign one of them. All right, but basically, this is what the compensation agreement, seller to buyer broker, looks like. So right here, you're going to add the buyer's broker. Who's that? Elite Ocean View Realty. Here, you're going to add the seller. So basically, this is an agreement between the seller and our brokerage. Okay. This agreement will remain in effect. You know, I would actually not leave it blank. I don't want to do it for 30 days. Let's go for 60 days, right? You know, we should close in less than 60 days. So just protect yourself on that. Okay. And then buyer's broker compensation. Is it a flat fee or is it a percentage of the purchase price? So if they don't want to pay you a flat fee, they want to pay you, I'm sorry, they don't want to pay you a percentage, but they want to pay you a flat fee and they tell you it's going to be $12,000, check, and then put $12,000. If they tell you we're going to compensate you 2.5%, then you're going to check and you're going to put 2.5%. All right, you don't have to put the percent, it's already here. Of the gross purchase price of the property plus $495. All right. For the actually they don't have to pay the $495. Your buyer's the one paying the $495. So basically 2.5%. And that's it. That's all you gotta do, guys. Get it initialed, get it signed, and this is the compensation agreement. Sellers to buyer broker. The other one is the compensation agreement. Seller's broker to buyer's broker. All right, so the other one is this one, compensation agreement, seller's broker to buyer's broker. That means that the selling broker, all right, in this case has collected or is going to collect 6% from their seller, and they are going to now, from their compensation, they're going to share with us whatever percentage we put here, right? Whatever percentage that we agreed to with that selling broker. Any questions on the difference between two forms? Elite Ocean View Realty prefers that you guys use compensation agreement, seller to buyer broker. Have the compensation come directly from the seller's proceeds at closing. All right. If you've ever seen a closing statement, right, an Ulta closing statement, you're going to see that the compensation comes from the seller's proceeds and it goes to each brokerage involved. It's how it's always been, and we want to try and keep it that way. So use the compensation agreement, seller to buyer's broker. Obviously, guys, if the seller's not offering any compensation and you still want to move forward with this transaction, then that's where your exclusive buyer broker agreement comes into play. You present the offer, you're now under contract, and at the end of the transaction at closing, all right, part of the closing cost for the buyer is to pay you whatever amount you have agreed to with them. That's in the event that the seller does not offer compensation. Okay, so we went ahead and kind of covered everything that I wanted to cover in class today. I did not cover the as-is residential contract for sale and purchase. It has no changes at all. All right, it really doesn't have any changes. Yes, it did add the compensation disclosure. All right, so it did add the compensation disclosure somewhere on it. So, you know, we know that we are using this and we're obeying the law, basically. All right. So, guys, the as-is contract really didn't go through any changes. Any questions on what we have covered today? All right, this has been recorded, and of course, we're going to load this into our YouTube channel. So please look for it on the YouTube channel and watch it again. If you have any questions, then you can always contact us, and we'd be happy to help everyone, okay? We are going to cover this in person next Friday, August 30th, at our Coral Gables office. The hour is going to be 10 o'clock. All right, I'm going to be the one teaching this here at our Coral Gables office next Friday, August 30th. So I look forward to seeing you guys here. All right. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us for our special class on the compensation agreements, the buyer broker agreement, and all the different changes to our business. All right. It's important that we
Robert,
up to date.
sorry, question. The meeting that you're gonna do the next Friday is gonna be at the office and by Zoom meeting or only at the office?
Only at the office. All
Okay,
right, so
thank
we
you.
we have one meeting per month in person, and we do it on the last Friday of every month, and it's gonna be in person. All the other meetings
Okay,
we have are through Zoom. All right.
Friday at 10.
Friday morning at 10 o'clock. Not this Friday, not tomorrow, but the following week.
30. See,
All
thank
right.
you so much.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, folks, thank you so much for joining today's class. And again, I hope that you were able to find it helpful. And let's go ahead and be productive with today, okay? Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you,
Robert.
Bye.
Thank you.